I'll hit record, and now it's recording us walking to the bar right now. Let me see the back of that thing.
Whoa!
Wow!
Can you make it a bit more sparkly?
To be in this beautiful part of the country, surrounded by gorgeous Alfa Romeos, celebrating our Alfisti passion and our many friendships made over the years is delightful. I thank you for your willingness to travel from far and near to celebrate the joys of our Italian cars.
We decided to talk about Alfas before and during World War II because we thought it was some area that may not be as well known to everybody as some of the later things that are later cars, obviously. And I asked a friend of mine, and a very special person, to come in from Milan. He's a fellow automotive historian, Michele Casiraghi, to join me, and he's flown here from Milan to help present these information with me. Michele is the author of a book, which I want to show you, Alfa Romeo 6C 2300 and 2500 in Corsa racing. It's a wonderful little book. It's something we had hoped to have a bunch of them on sale here today. Unfortunately, they're still sitting in a box in Italy. So
Maybe all right.
If you have, Alfa really thought that the 6C was going to be their future in cars, and they really worked hard to develop these cars from their introduction at that time. And they made different versions.
Yeah, of course, they made luxury version.
And this is really the heart of it, really, is the 6C 2300B. This is what Alfa is producing and giving to coach builders. They made some bodies themselves, but many of the bodies were made by other coach builders. They get a chassis, engine, drivetrain, and then build a body for it. Pininfarina and Touring were two of the big ones. Castagna built some.
Yeah, it was a completely different way of imagining the cars. Alfa Romeo was producing basically just the chassis and the engine and all the mechanical parts, and it was the same for other brands in Italy and in the world. So Alfa Romeo was the manufacturer of the platform on which coach builder could invent different bodies and different styles and different type of cars.
It's true. You know, one of the things I think is so fascinating is there's this conversation with coach builders. It's not really a competition as much as they're all watching each other and benefiting from the designs. And as we look at the designs of these different cars, we can see how they're looking at each other and copying things and saying, oh, I could do that, or I'm going to change that, I can do that better, or whatever it is.
Also, it was not just a matter of style, but also of technology, because we have touring with, we'll see it later with the patents and the different technologies on building cars. So it was just also really
good point.
Yeah.
The different techniques and different things that they would make as their sales idea and marketing idea, but also their manufacturing techniques. So we'll see that in just a little bit. One of the things that fascinated me as I was studying for this, some of the information for this talk, is that one of the things that Alfa Romeo was working on at the end of, in 42, 43, was to make the most powerful piston engine that was made for any airplane during World War II. And it was a 28-cylinder, 7-bank, 4 cylinders in each bank engine, supercharged, and brilliant design. And it never got really produced. It didn't get quite developed fully. They were dealing with bombing. They were working on this in a cave near Lake Maggiore, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And they really had to move the production out of the whole factory. But it was amazing because that was the most powerful piston engine. And had it not been for the development of the jet engines in Germany and also in England, this engine would have been the most impressive, I think. And they were working on a 42-cylinder engine at the time also.
I think we should highlight in this picture, it's funny, the sign you see on the left, it says, in Italian of course, but it says something like, workmen, shut up, because the enemy is listening. Because it was in 1941, so they wanted no one to tell what they were doing inside the factory, because of course it was a secret and they were at war.
You know, one of the things I learned in the course of studying some of these things is that Alfa Romeo felt that so many coach builders were building these wonderful 6C 2500 cars, but they didn't look anything like each other, and you couldn't even tell they were Alfas. And they got upset about this, and January 47 sent a letter to everybody, if you want to build the 6C 2500, you have to use the Alfa Shield from now on. So everybody had to, but this is the prototype of where that was coming from.
And we can tell also on this car that it was in fact a special order by the King of Romania. He came to visit Alfa Romeo in 1941 and he tried to drive around in a racing Alfa Romeo HC 2.9, a car we will see at the end of the presentation. He liked it very much and he asked for a similar car, and they built him this car with the same HC 2.9 engine, so the most powerful engine that Alfa Romeo could produce at the time. And in fact, he was not satisfied because the car with this new body was much slower, of course, because it was like double the weight.
So as the war began and people were looking for cars and cars were not available and new cars weren't being produced, a lot of people who had race cars were converting them to street use and putting different bodies on them. So we put a record of that a little bit together.
Yeah,
Oh, look at that.
yeah, and this is the car we were mentioning before, so the car that the King of Romania went to test in Italy in 1941. And it's an 8C car with a very aerodynamic and futuristic body built during the war. Of course, again, with the idea that one day the war would have stopped and car racing would start again.
So this is what we wanted to talk about, was give you some perspective on some of the stuff that Alfa did at that time when it was so hard to make a business and so difficult to make cars as a business. they weren't a car company, they became a car company. And this is where we are today, is the Alfa Romeo having become a car company and really become a very special thing for all of us. So I want to thank you all and thank Michele for helping.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much.
Now, at the time I was working for a small independent Alfa Romeo shop, and one day on a Friday evening we were having drinks standing around some of the project cars, and my boss, Alan, he, once he's had a whiskey or two, he likes to sort of chat, and he said, oh, you know, all these new modern SUVs, they're so terrible, if they went wrong at the side of the road, you would never be able to fix them. If you told me to drive to London right now, I would take a little old Alfa Romeo. And that's when my mind started sort of taking over. And I couldn't sleep for about a week. I just kept thinking about this. And so this is a map I made to test Alan's idea of could you drive to the United Kingdom from South Africa. And at the time, I had no idea if it was even possible. I didn't know if the roads connected. I didn't know if it was even possible in a 4x4. But this is the map I made. I pulled this up from my old hard drive. This was the plan that I put together at the age of 20. Once I put that map together, I didn't tell my parents that I was planning on doing this for a few months. When I did eventually tell them, they just sort of looked at me and said, are you being serious, or is this one of your sort of silly ideas like putting a car in the garage? And I had two Alfa Romeos to choose from. I had the 2-liter GTD and the 1964 Sprint GT. And I decided that I would take the 64 Sprint because it was already a bare shell and it would be easier to rebuild everything from there than starting with a car that had to go back down again. But also I thought the step nose was just the most iconic Alfa. And this was the first day that the car had been a complete car on its own in about 35 years. I drove it at night in the rain, which is a really great way to test drive a car for the first time. And you can see in this photograph, the brake lights are on because the whole brake system was binding up and holding pressure. So I got stuck on a dirt road in the rain, in the mud, trying to get up to their house with the brakes binding on the front, which was a really good baptism of fire into what I would go through in this car in the coming years. All right. I decided that part of what I needed to do to get the car travel ready was to install a long-range fuel tank. This was about the only modification that I made to the car, apart from raising the suspension ever so slightly. And it was simply strapped in with a jerry can underneath. And this way I had enough fuel to go 1,000 miles between flips.
Wow, the jerry can fall through?
Yeah. So what I did with this car is I did raise the suspension, so it would sit at a roughly stock ride height when fully loaded with fuel, tools, and all my luggage. And then I had all the wheel alignment done when it was fully loaded. So a little bit of an odd thing about this car is when you took everything out, the wheel alignment will go out and you drive in a very, very terrifying way. So it had to be fully loaded all the time in order for it to drive properly. When I got the car back home after the trip, I actually did cut the springs with an angle grinder to slam it right down on the floor because I thought it would look cool when I lived in Cape Town. And then it drove in a terrifying way, but in a completely sort of new way. This is Cape Agulhas in South Africa. This is the southernmost point of the African continent and the meeting point for the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. I'm sure you can tell by this point. I wasn't much of a photographer. I didn't really know what makes any photograph special. There exist almost no photographs of me from this time in my life because I realized all I was doing was taking photographs of my car with the background changing. It's only now, 10 years later, that I would realize that it would be much more interesting if I actually appeared in these photographs. This is the morning of 27th of June, 2015. I decided to depart from a good friend of mine's coffee shop in Dargle, South Africa, on the east coast. I had a few friends and family just come down and join me, and some members of the local Alfa Club. My first country that I crossed into was Botswana, not far from Johannesburg at all. And I made this rule when I started driving, was that I was never going to cross a border after dark, because that's terrifying. You don't want to arrive in a new country at night. You don't really want to be driving in the evening at all on African roads. And of course, because I spent the afternoon crawling around a dirty, filthy plane on top of a petrol station roof, it meant that I did get to the border post after dark and had to drive in Botswana at night. I lay awake in my tent that night, terrified by what I had done to myself. I thought, if I drive for 2 days, I can be back at home in my bed, safe and sound, and I don't have to do the silly thing of driving across Africa just because I've told everyone in my life that this is what I'm going to do. I sort of looked on at the next few months with a feeling of absolute terror. I thought, what have I done to myself? What have I done to my life? What decisions have I made that have brought me to this point? So I went back to Johannesburg, sorted out my bank cards, and took another run and went to Zimbabwe. Now, the Zambezi is really the point in Africa where any further north than that, you really have to start worrying about malaria. And I had started taking malaria medication prior to this, but I have a good story about malaria coming a little bit later. After crossing into Zambia, the southern part of Zambia around Livingstone is a very sort of touristy place. Right. This is in a town called Mbeya in Tanzania. This is the border town between Zambia and Tanzania. The roads in Tanzania are absolutely terrifying. Everywhere you go, there are remnants of terrible, terrible accidents scattered along the side of the highway. This is what the middle of Tanzania looks like. This is in Morogoro. The closer you get to Dar es Salaam, the more wild things you would see in the traffic. So this, I think there were 2 men on this motorcycle carrying goods to the market. This is a bus with photos of Muammar Gaddafi and Osama bin Laden on it. These are sort of the wild things that you would see in the traffic in Tanzania. So at this point, I'd been traveling for about a month, and I decided that I was moving too quickly. So I decided I was going to stay put in Makati Beach for a little bit and live out of a tent on the beach under some trees, living alongside my classic Alfa Romeo. So we had a good little group of friends sort of building up on the beach. And this happened to be the end of Ramadan in 2015. And the whole time we were camping there, we'd been warned that there was a party about to be thrown by the staff of the backpackers. And we thought, yeah, good big party. And the night of the party eventually came, and realized there were going to be about 2,000 people on the beach around our campsite. So we decided what we were going to do to be very smart was we're going to take everyone's valuables and lock them in the trunk of my car to make sure that nothing ever happened to them. And as the night went on, one of the travelers that Dominic had picked up on the train was a Danish ski instructor who decided he wanted to find out who could drink more, a journalism student or a ski instructor. And of course, we had far too much to drink that night. Jens, of course, didn't help. He found out that there was a local gin in Tanzania called Casiraghi, which you could pour into a slushy and turn into the most alcoholic, horrible drink imaginable, but he thought they were a lot of fun. And I remember already being over the limit a little bit, and sort of Jensen emerging from the crowd of 2,000 people with these bright orange slushies, which he gave to me, and I promptly felt terribly ill and wandered in the sea to throw up where no one could see me. Now, the next morning, I woke up not inside my tent, not inside my car, but on a mattress next to my tent. And I'd realized that in my terrible drunken state of mind, I had decided that I was going to sleep on a mattress outside in case I threw up, but I didn't want to throw up in my tent and ruin the rest of my trip. And I thought, this is a very good line of reasoning. But I also then realized that I'd woken up covered in mosquitoes from head to toe, lying in the sand. Everyone else was also terribly worse for wear. and we needed to get all our valuables out of the trunk of my car so we could go and get breakfast. At which point I realized that the keys were no longer in my pocket. At some point during my midnight swim, while highly intoxicated, I had dropped the keys on the bottom of the Indian Ocean. And now everybody's wallets, passports, phones were locked in the trunk of my car with no way to access them. Luckily, as you all know, the door handles in Alfa 105s tend to wear out incredibly quickly. So I thought I had a very securely locked car the whole time. It turns out we could open the doors with the back of a teaspoon and get access to the boot. And this is the story of why, to this day, I only have one ignition key for this car. I had a spare that was hidden in the glove box. These were some of the other overlanders that showed up at Makati Beach while I was traveling. It was quite fun to be the only sports car amongst the, being at Makati Beach, all the Land Rovers would come through, it'd be sort of Land Rover, Land Cruiser, Alpha. This is in a town called Bagamoyo, which is the old capital of German East Africa, and is now just a small town on the Tanzanian coast. It is a bit of a strange place. It used to be a Catholic mission, and they've left all sorts of interesting buildings, but during my time here, I'd had to say goodbye to all my friends in Dar es Salaam and continue with my trip. And I felt terribly melancholic, sort of being back on my own and camping in a place that was quite spooky. Now, this is about 2 weeks later after the giant party in Dar es Salaam, when I'd woken up covered in mosquitoes. I'd left Bagamoyo hoping to make it to Arusha by the end of the day. Early on in the morning, I started feeling these terrible aches in my joints and an unbelievable splitting headache, at which point I realized it had been 2 weeks on the dot since I'd allowed myself to be a midnight feast for all the mosquitoes in Dar es Salaam, and malaria landed while I was driving. And within about half an hour, I got to the point where I could no longer drive anymore, and I pulled over to the side of the road and went down a little dirt track and found a little spot to camp at the side of a river. This is my campsite where I was so ill that I had to sort of, I could open the boot of the car, get the tent out, sort of throw up, put half the tent up, throw up, sort of move some of my luggage out, throw up. It was a really, really terrifying moment. And at this point, I sort of took all the malaria meds that I had on me, and I realized, if I wasn't able to drive the following day, that I would be in really, really big trouble. And I took these photos the day after I was really, really ill, and luckily, I was able to pull myself together just enough to drive to Arusha and go and see a clinic. And they told me that actually what you'd done was incredibly irresponsible, and you were very, very close to succumbing to malaria properly. And where I was in the world, I would not have been able to get any help. So the moral of that story is that if you're going to drink in Dar es Salaam, sleep inside when you do it. And so I was really shocked to find a very, very strong Alfa Romeo Club in Nairobi, which included, an Alfa Romeo Montreal. So this is my car, and that's Peter's car there. I was completely blown away by the love for classic cars that I saw in Nairobi. It was a bit unusual on the continent. After leaving Nairobi, I crossed the middle of the country. This is Mount Kenya, which is a sort of snow-capped, jagged peak in the middle of the country, almost on the equator. I had been warned before that this stretch of road was known as the Bandit Highway. And I think this was a previous victim of the bandits. And this marked the point where I first came across camels in my trip. Yeah, much of this road that I drove was actually so rough that it would shake the car to the point where the carburetors would flood and the car would cut out. The corrugations were really, really quite massive. And of course, if you've ever driven an old Alfa on corrugations, you know that to get it to smooth out, you have to drive as fast as possible. So these corrugations were actually so big I couldn't even get the Sprint GT up to a speed where it would even out. So I just drove for hundreds of kilometers with the car just absolutely shaking. And surprisingly, nothing actually did rattle loose on this section. There was a hotel that advertised that it had running water, and I thought, oh, this is good enough for me. It turns out it was actually not a hotel, but a brothel and a bar combined. I walked in and took one look at the bed and said, absolutely no way am I even touching that. So I went back to the car and got all my camping gear and set up camp in the corner and slept on the floor in the brothel instead of touching that bed. The whole night people banged on the door and wanted to and demanded to know who the Westerner in town was. It was one of the most terrifying experiences. Eventually a man arrived who said he was a tour guide and could show me around town, and for some reason, I have no idea why I believed him, and he said he was going to show me to the best restaurant in town. And he took me to a restaurant that had a dirt floor and plastic furniture and goat carcasses sort of rotting in the windows covered in flies. And he said, don't worry, I'll order, I know what the best thing is here. And just before he ordered, he looked at me and said, you're not a vegetarian, are you? And I said, oh, yes, I am. That was the first and only time in my life I'd ever pretended to be a vegetarian. These are the Ethiopian highlands above, just north of Addis Ababa. And down at the bottom of this valley is the source of the Nile. There were sort of more animals and traffic on the road here than in any other country. I think the only country that was more terrifying to drive in was probably France.
It looks like you finally transitioned to driving on the right.
Oh, yes. Ethiopia is actually the point in East Africa where you cross over from the left to the right, and which for me was a first in my life. And driving a right-hand drive car on the right side of the road in a country like Ethiopia was really, that was quite a terrifying experience. But weirdly, over the course of a few months, I got very used to driving a right-hand drive car on the right, sort of sticking up against the side of the road. The problem was when I wanted to overtake somebody, I would have to sort of do this thing. You put sort of two wheels in the grass and have a look this way, and then go over this way and have a look and see, and try and slingshot around. And luckily, an Alfa Romeo is actually quite good for that sort of thing.
Steal your pizza?
The pizza that I can't get.
Number 111, Michael. And Fire has the best time of the 41634 right now.
Not quite your fastest. For anybody who cares, we're doing 7 runs this afternoon. 7 runs.
For the people who don't care, we're doing 20.
For those who don't care, we're still doing 7 runs.
Aww.
7 runs of fun. Has he passed time with 360?
Got a 48, 449, 48, 449.
Oh, that's it.
Model has European. Okay, so one light came from Poland, one came from Germany, and the drill came from Italy.
Yeah, they've got about 20 more minutes worth of touring. He just stopped them to let people on track. Look at this group.
Right, right. We're buying this for.
Yeah, which is great. There's a
This
color
like second most expensive plus two.
$70 for two of them, right? Yeah, it's good. So I'm just doing my notes here. Did you see that gray Julietta?
On the end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see how he car show since like? Did you see that?
Yeah, that's. What did you say?
Well, that's what I said, and I said,
I noticed that when you get up to like 5,000-6,000.
That's cool. That's why I voted for it, just for that. I know all these people. Is it the SS? Because I remember one registered person trying to get their shit wrong. I was thinking,
That's the kiddies.
Well, I'll tell you who runs at it. I'll tell you this. Donkey a year league and then a Vanderbilt summer. You know how it works? Nice camera. I know how it works. I have my
The place I go also asked me if I get a manicure if I want my back.
Oh, yeah, I was running in the curve because I was trying to put the car, my face, in the left side of the lane. And there's a whole car to my left. So it was. The third day got everything.
No, it's 4. We already got it.
Alright, let's go back. So it's really, really
Bam, bam, they're right next to each other. You know? And next week I'm corner working at a hill climb in Wisconsin.
Do you know a guy named John Welch? Big hill climb guy.
No, I'm not a hill climb guy yet. I did one hill climb. We have a load of hill climbers.
Yeah, I heard that. See, we're low this guy, so.
I got a rat rod Molina. There he is, long sleeve blue shirt. Me? Yeah.
Yeah, 164.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, they kind of go with the
That goes
schematic.
with it. I go with that one.
Nice to have, but I no longer have it 164.
Yeah, I know. I heard it. I bought one from it.
There it is. Now you know. You should take it home. It's beautiful. That would look great in your living room.
I'll be there. We
still situated in the car.
on our GTV round off.
Thank you. Oh, we did a 20.
I was afraid it was going to crack, so we just got in there.
Kind of figured you weren't going to tip me that much. God, is that Dan? Oh my God!
That's what the bolt pattern is on the 15-inch.
Two spider.
Oh, I don't have the rims. All I have is
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
You know, like right after the rip wrap, you know, but people go as far as they can, and that's like people.